Welcome back to the Humble Rising podcast. I have a treat for you today because I have with me Valerie Zolezzi-Wyndham, who is a loving, inclusive leadership strategist, awakening courage and amplifying culture every single day. Valerie and I met on LinkedIn. I always say, don't sleep on LinkedIn. It's a powerful relationship builder, but you have to show up on that platform and engage with people. So don't sleep on LinkedIn. In any event, Valerie and I connected there on LinkedIn for quite some time before we actually met in person at a United Latinas event here in Boston. And it was a wrap. I told her I have to have you on the podcast. And so we connected further. And I'm so glad she is joining me on the podcast today. A little bit more about Valerie. Valerie is the founder and CEO of Promoting Good. And prior to founding her 7-year-old firm, she practiced preventative law at a nonprofit where she founded and managed a medical legal partnership addressing health harming legal needs. And today, she leads a team that is using proven and evidence-based frameworks to build workplaces where everyone can thrive. And outside of work, Valerie is an active volunteer. In addition to serving on several nonprofit boards, she is the co-founder and co-director of Casita Cultura Latina, a nonprofit that amplifies Latino culture and conversations about equity in Central Massachusetts. She's a proud Mexican immigrant, and she has a bachelor's from Boston College, go Eagles, and a JD from Boston University School of Law. And in this episode, Valerie and I talk about her journey from Mexico City to Massachusetts, where she transitioned from a management role selling industrial hardware to practicing nonprofit law for 17 years before founding her own consulting company, Promoting Good. We dive into that moment when you know it's time to leave a job that you love, even when loyalty makes it feel hard to walk away, and how sometimes leaving is what you should do to create space for others to grow and shine. Valerie opens up about creating workplaces where people feel safe to speak up, the challenges middle managers face when caught between company values and daily realities, and why staying true to your values is crucial during uncertain times. She shares her excitement about launching a new inclusive leadership assessment tool that helps leaders pinpoint their strengths and blind spots, and why giving honest feedback early makes such a difference. We also chat about her plans for the rest of the year, including taking groups of women to experience Mexico, which is dear to her heart. And we talk about her personal focus to bringing more play and growth into her life and work. And now, here's my conversation with Valerie. Valerie, it's so good to have you here. Welcome to the Humble Rising podcast.
It is so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So, Valerie, we kick off a similar way every time we start an episode, and that's with your story. So tell us more about your story and what led you to do what you do today.
Thank you for inviting me to share my story. And I want to just start by saying I love your colors. As you can tell, right? I love red. And so I love that you have the pinks and the blue. So my story, I am originally from Mexico City. That's where I was born, and where, a little bit, or maybe a big bit of my heart still sits. But I've been in the United States for my entire adult life. And, the short version of my story is that I, worked a distribution job for 5 years while my husband got his PhD. And so I sold industrial hardware. It's like a, Home Depot, but on steroids. Oh. And it definitely wasn't where I wanted to stay, but I learned some amazing leadership skills in that role. It was a management training program for smart kids out of college. And so I still carry a lot of what I learned in that space, although I don't have to wear boots anymore.
Yeah.
Going to warehouses. But my dream was really to go to law school. And so once my husband finished his PhD, because we all, we needed one of us to
Mm-hmm.
some money.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I went to law school with the intention of doing nonprofit law, which I did for 17 years after law school. And I loved my client work. I worked in legal aid in Massachusetts, where I live still, and it was really important work. And I, in that journey of practicing law, I quickly transitioned to management, in part because of these amazing things that I'd learned as a new manager in after college. And there was such a need in the legal field, not only in the nonprofit space, right, but in the law, to have somebody who actually had management skills managing, right? Because I think sometimes, right, lawyers think that they can do the things because they're lawyers, right? And even
Yes.
an employment discrimination lawyer does not make you a good HR person, right? Or make you, right, a good manager. And so I had a lot of those skills, and I was really, I felt really proud to be able to bring that expertise that I had to my organization. And I was one of the few Latinas in my firm, and there just wasn't a lot of diversity. And yet, because of who we served, right, the demographics of our clients was, almost entirely communities of color.
Mm-hmm.
And a very large Latino community, because I practiced in Worcester, where 25% of the population is Latino. And so I did a lot of work to diversify our staff base, and also did a lot of work to help really wonderful colleagues of mine who are white and privileged to be able to work more effectively with their clients, because it is about both things, right? It's about adding new people into that space, but it's also about equipping people who want to do that work to have the skills they need to really connect with clients. And so I sort of by accident started doing this work of diversity and inclusion, and before anyone was doing it, or or it was cool. And then, long story short, like, life told me that was no longer my place, and it was time for me to move on. And so I resigned, and really on a leap of faith started promoting good 8 years ago.
Wait, Valerie, I have to stop you there
Yeah.
because you said long story short, and I'm like, oh no, gonna be a good story. Talk more about that.
Yes.
You decided this is no longer where I need to be.
So I probably knew 4 years before I left that it was time for me to leave. And I I really struggled to leave for a number of reasons, right? One, I'm super loyal, right? That's like part of part of my, right, Latina identity.
Mm-hmm.
I really loved my staff and didn't want to abandon them. And I think was convinced that I could still push more change. And it became increasingly clear that that I had pushed as far as that space and the leadership was going to allow me to push, and that my contributions were no longer being embraced.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it was time for me to move on. I think both for my own well-being, and because I want to have impact, right? My husband will probably tell you that he knew, he knew when he knew when things started to get to a place where it was time to move on.
Yes.
And he would encourage me to look or to think about what I would do next. But I wasn't ready, right? And so there was, an incident that happened that was really painful, that gave me that realization that I really couldn't stay there any longer. It wasn't going to be good for me. And also it wasn't going to be good for the people who I really wanted to support. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really did, like, it was from one day to the next, I handed my letter of resignation. I had been thinking about this. I had been thinking about promoting good, like what it could be. I didn't have a name, but I sort of had this idea, and people had been asking me for advice along the way. And so I'd consult here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is like things happen like they're supposed to, right? So I had this like weird thing that happened, a painful thing that happened with my boss. And at the same time, a dear friend of mine had reached out to say, hey, like, I need somebody to do this thing for me. Do you know someone who could do it?
And you're like,
And I was like, oh, this is it. Like, this is the gift, right? Of life telling you it's time to move on.
Yes.
So I left and I started my practice with this one client, right? A tiny, and I was like, if it doesn't work out, I can get another law job, right? I
Yep.
mean, that's the privilege of being a lawyer and of having that skill.
Yes.
So that's the story. Um, at least to that point. And I don't know if you have a follow-up question or if you want me to sort of continue with my story.
Yes. No. So no, because I'm always very interested in pivots and transitions and shifts.
Yeah.
And oftentimes when I talk to especially women of color, there's a lot of what you said about loyalty, especially in Latino culture. There's a lot of emphasis on gratitude,
Mm,
loyalty, community, like that I owe something and
mm,
that I need to continue past what I feel like I can give and what is, I think, the maximum optimal level of what I've given and contributed, that I should stay because, like you said, like the people, and that there is this deeper reason why we stay past where we know we should stay, like the moment we know that it's time.
yeah.
And and we know logically, but there's something about, I'm curious about what your experience was. There's something about listening to your body too. I'm wondering if you had been thinking about it, then this painful event happened with your manager or your boss. Is that when your body was like, let's go? Because you had been thinking about it for 4 years, right? And then an event happened. Was it now an all body experience? Because I tend to find that most people, they have to feel it completely versus just in their mind to actually leave and pursue their next chapter.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say it was a combination of things. I mean, I was I was definitely immensely hurt. Like I have never cried at work.
Mm,
It wasn't a thing I ever did. I mean, I sort of, I know I have trained myself very well, right, to behave like you're supposed to behave in a workplace.
mm,
And and the interaction that we had sort of was that moment where I couldn't hold the sadness that I felt, or and really
yeah.
the disrespect and the disrespect that I felt, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of a misunderstanding of my purpose.
Mm,
And so yes, I think it was that physical experience of not being able to control my emotions anymore,
yeah.
that which is something I'm really good at doing, that that also clicked a switch in my mind where the only option was to protect myself and get out, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and as and I will say, I think it took me 2 years to grieve the loss
Yeah.
and to not be mad anymore, and or sad anymore. And one of the things that I have discovered that I now use in my work is, I think I was still convinced that even though it wasn't good for me personally, that I was still performing sort of at my most excellent.
Mm,
And I think now I was still doing really, I mean, I was still, kicking butt and doing more than anyone else was doing. And, um, doing all of the things and bringing in tons of grant money, more, more than anyone else, all of those things. But I didn't realize until later that I probably wasn't giving my staff, all of the love and all of the focus and all of the support that I could have been giving them. And but I think it's hard for us to see that when we're not as well as we want to be. And I think the other really beautiful gift that came out of my leaving is, I left on good, I left on good terms. I did all of those things you're supposed to do, right?
yes. Don't burn bridges. Right.
Don't ever burn bridges. And it took me years to even talk about this stuff. And I still won't name the people, all of those things.
Yeah.
Um, but I was able to encourage an absolutely spectacular employee of mine to apply for my job and to make her feel like she should be in that role. And she is, I mean, she's a rock star. She now is the CEO of a nonprofit that's doing amazing work. And she was ready for that job. And so my leaving gave her an opportunity to lead, right? And so sometimes we have to leave so that other people can shine.
Mhm.
And so now it's amazing to watch all of these. And then she left, and now she's somewhere else doing really, really amazing work. And now I'm just watching her soar, and it's this beautiful, beautiful thing. So I think the lesson, I think there is that loyalty that you talked about, and I think sometimes if we stick in that loyalty, then we're also taking away an opportunity from somebody who needs it when we no longer need it anymore, right? I didn't need that job anymore, but she did. And so I think there's a lesson there too.
Yes. And, for you, holding yourself back, staying in that role also would be holding yourself back from the work you do now, which is incredibly impactful in a different way, which is promoting good. So tell us more about promoting good and the work you do there and what you're focused on in 2025.
Sure. So promoting good, we are an inclusive leadership consulting firm. I'm so excited to be celebrating 8 years.
Yay! That's amazing. No, that's amazing. Yes.
And to have a team now of 7 people who are doing the work with me. And so promoting good, it has evolved like every good organization has, and has done a lot of learning. So when we hit 5, I decided that I really wanted to better understand what we had done well, what we could do better, and what made those clients of ours who were the most successful succeed. And when we weren't successful, because we also need to be honest and acknowledge, right, that sometimes we aren't able to have the impact that we want to have. And so one of the things that we discovered is that diversity and inclusion, equity, whether it's health equity or race equity or gender equity, the success of that work is so tied to leadership and to inclusive leadership. And so we spent a lot of time and resources studying in our own work what the traits of an inclusive leader are that make you successful in ensuring that everybody can thrive, right? And I say can thrive because there's always, we also have to give of ourselves, right?
Yes.
And so what I'm most excited about now is that we have validated an assessment tool, and I won't share the name of it yet because that's still secret, but it's an assessment tool that is going to help us identify the inclusive leadership strengths and gaps that leaders have, so that we can, from the start of our work with them, really pinpoint where they need to focus their efforts in terms of their growth, and also their greatest strengths that they can leverage for that growth that they need to make. I think in the work that we do, one of the challenges for participation and for full buy-in is, this, we all, myself included, right, think we are more inclusive than we are, right? Right? Like I think I'm faster than I am at running, right? Or I think my patience with my husband, right, is more than it is. And so then when somebody tells us that perhaps our impact isn't what we intend, hearing that can be really difficult. And then we get defensive, or we get quiet, or we avoid whatever those behaviors are. And so we have built a powerful tool that's going to help you measure the difference between like where you actually are in the impact that you have, so that you can align your impact to your desire to lead inclusively. Because we really believe that most people, at least those who want to work with us, want to be inclusive leaders, right? They want everyone on their team to thrive, and they get stuck in that disconnect. And so we're really excited about the power of the tool and how it's going to allow us to support people in a in a more sort of direct and targeted way. And it's also going to allow teams to have really powerful information about where their team is at, right? Where their strengths are as a group. And also for us to be able to understand how people with different identities experience leadership, right? And also express leadership, right? So we're really excited about that product. And I, we weren't making this shift to inclusive leadership before all of this, noise emerged about, whether diversity and inclusion work should exist or not.
Mm-hmm.
That the work that we are doing is really the result of the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that we've seen successful. And so we're excited to pair leadership work with impactful DEI work, so that clients who continue to be committed can have the impact that they want to have, so that they don't get discouraged, right? And so that they keep at it and have success. Because I think the other half of this is, there is also the frustration, and I imagine that you see this in your coaching work. You have these leaders who are trying and maybe not succeeding as much as they'd like. And then you also have people who really need that change to happen, who are frustrated, and who maybe sometimes on that frustration do things that don't help them in their careers.
Correct. Yes.
And so I'm really excited this year. Our focus is going to be to really serve those two groups of people in a much more targeted way, right? Like, so what does a leader do who wants to lead inclusively, who's struggling? And then also, how do we support that leader in, both growing their own leadership skills, but also like understanding, right, how their leadership needs and and sort of what that other person bring, how they clash, and how to manage that. Because I think there's the work that you need to do to build your leadership, and you also have to be aware of your environment, right, and how to navigate it.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear, I think this is what I was most excited to chat with you about, because I think you have a perspective on that group of leaders, right, who are sort of struggling because they're, they want to be inclusive and be good leaders, and at the same time they're dealing with the struggles that they face, right, given who they are in the workplace.
Yeah, there's so much here to unpack, Valerie. So I do see and observe that leaders, I think it depends on the environment you're in, like how fast paced your environment is, how big your team is, what is on your plate. Literally, what are things that you need to produce, like you are responsible for, versus something that your team is responsible for producing, so you're responsible for, but they really do a lot of the hard work, rolling up the sleeves, and you're there to support, encourage, help finalize, help deliver, but you're not the doer on the line all the time. I do think that's a big difference in terms of leadership because of capacity. When you are a leader where you have to make sure you know about everything your team is doing and be on top of that, and have your own stuff to be on top of, and then be able to communicate all of that to a more senior leader who wants to know about everything and who thinks that you should be knowing about everything your team does, that is much harder than for that leader to have the space to be like, I also want to be this kind of leader, versus just focusing on task execution.
Yeah.
Like that can be really challenging. And so there's less capacity and space for them to be the leader they want to be. And they want their team to feel psychologically safe, but a lot of what they're experiencing is from their leadership.
Yes.
And they're also seeing certain things role modeled. And they're saying, oh, to be successful here, if I want to be successful here, I'm looking at these people up here and they're not doing what I'm trying to do with my team. I'm trying to do it different, but I am in some ways limited because of what's coming in above me.
Yes.
So I don't know if you've seen that as well, if you've seen that as a challenge.
No, I've definitely seen it as a challenge. And I think sometimes it causes a difficult relationship, right? And and I think often why we like to work with both of those leaders, right, is that I think sometimes a lot of that doesn't get addressed
Yes.
or negotiated. And because people are coming from such different perspectives, you're perceiving, but you don't really understand the full picture of what's going on. And
Yes.
so, when we work with an entire leadership team where we have, the senior leader and then sort of the middle leader,
Mm-hmm.
we can help them we can provide each of them with support, and we can provide them support together so that
Yes.
they can really understand like the kind of relationship that they have to co-create to be able to be successful, right? And because I do see a lot of, there can be a lot of frustration, right, about what you're not getting from that leader above you. And so how do you figure out how to get that, or
Mm-hmm.
to realize that you're not going to get it and that that's not the space for you, right?
Yes. There's an element here of, what do I have to make peace with? Like, what can I make peace with, and what actually can I not?
Yes.
Like for me, when I was in corporate, after I was a lawyer, and I went totally into corporate, into HR, I always needed a leader that cared about psychological safety. Like I needed that. Like
Yeah.
I can't be on a team where I can't speak my mind. Like that is not a non-negotiable.
Right.
And I'm sure there are people, and I know there are people who across different companies who are they're on a team where they cannot, it's very difficult for them to even speak up about anything. And that's something that they are either working to accept or not accept. But when you are a leader of a team and you yourself don't feel psychologically safe on the leadership team you're on, it is very difficult for you to, without support like from you, right, to change that narrative for your team. Like
Yes.
that's a difference, right? Like it's not being role modeled. Okay, fine, that's fine. But I'm gonna do something different for my team, and I'm gonna role model for them so that when I'm growing them as leaders, they can follow this leadership style that I think is actually the most effective and impactful. Because we talk a lot about like inclusion, psychological safety, what makes a real high performing team. And we know from the research that what makes a really high performing team is a team that actually can go through struggles together, can talk freely, can be honest and respectful at the same time, can be kind, they support each other, and they're not afraid to get into tough conversations because there is a trust and there's some emotional safety there. It's like
Yes.
no different from like a friendship of like, do I feel safe talking to you? Do I feel like I can say something to you and you not poo poo all of my ideas and make me feel like my feelings are not valid or my ideas are not valid?
Yeah. No, that's right. And I think one of the things that can happen, right, is that even if it's not what you want, you can easily end up, mimicking the behavior.
Yes. Default, like yes, default. Yep.
And
Yep.
so I think you have to have a lot of presence and a lot of care, right, to stay authentic to who you are, and to create the accountability that you want to have on your team, while just acknowledging the larger environment that you're in. And I think the other thing that I encourage people to think about, who are in that position, is what is it that you want to get out of this experience while you are there, right?
Yes.
And so let's plan around that. And then, what support do you need to be able to achieve those goals and to be well,
Mm-hmm.
until you decide that it's no longer tenable, right? And so, but I think you have to be willing to be vulnerable,
Yes.
to have those conversations, right? And to figure that out, and to process all of that. But it's really, really important to do, because otherwise you can end up in a place where you're sort of stuck, right?
Yes. Yeah. What are some other challenges you see, um, you're seeing with leaders, and how are you helping them through those challenges?
So, I mean, I think coming into 2025, I mean, we're seeing a lot of challenges with, people who are sort of uncertain about what's going to come with the new administration, right? And I think there's, and so what I keep saying to my clients is, there are lots of things that we cannot control. And something you have complete control over is your culture. And culture trumps everything else, right? Not to use, and I hate to use that word now, but right, culture is everything. And so you may not know what you can do about what's coming or not coming, right, from the federal government. And you control your culture, right? So what are you communicating about your values? So lead with your values. If your values say, respect, then how are you ensuring that respect is shown on your team, right? And and what is within your power to support your employees, right? So that they have the tools that they need. What is it that who are your clients? And what is it they need from you, and let that guide you. So I think that leaders are struggling because they don't know what to do, and some of them are hesitating and just waiting and waiting. And in that waiting and waiting, their employees are feeling stress because they don't know where the organization stands.
And it's almost like employees need leadership on this.
They need to know what you stand for and what you don't stand for. And I think you can say, we don't know what's going to happen at a federal level, right? We don't know what impacts might come. And I can say that these are our values and these are the things that we are committed to, right? And so I think it is a time for courage. It is a time for communication. And it's a time for curiosity, right? Like, what are your people feeling? What are they worried about? And how, and you could even say, like, there are things I can't answer and these things I can't answer, right? So I think communication is really important. And showing courage is really important. And, some things are going to have to change. And so I think the other really important thing is creativity, right? What creative solutions can help you to provide what you need to provide to your employees and to your clients? And, and how can you be flexible about how you approach the work that you do to build new solutions, which is such an exciting thing for teams, right? Except for folks who don't like change, but you can make being creative a really fun thing, right? But you can't be scared. So I think a lot of leaders, everyone's walking around scared. And to be honest, like, there are days I'm scared. And we need it's okay to say it. But you can't paralyze yourself with that fear, right?
Yes, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we know that, and I would say, and there's uncertainty, and this is an opportunity. Like this, I think this is an opportunity for companies, organizations, leaders to show us who they are. Like, I really do think it's an opportunity. And you don't have to have all the answers to show us who you are. But like you said, a company's values, that is like the bedrock of who they are. And I know what the company I used to work at, and I know other companies do, they have culture statements. This is what our culture is. And so when you apply to a job there, they're like, this is our culture statement. If you're not aligned with this, don't even bother applying. But, and some culture statements are very, like, they're encompassing of a lot of different components. And they say, here's our cultural statement. Here are our values. If this is going to be an issue for you, please don't come, please don't work here. And there is a strategy that leaders at a very high level, like the C-suite level, the EC level, there's a strategy of how do we make sure that every quarter we're reminding our people about our values. All employee web chats, all employee meetings. Are you reminding your people about your values and who we are as a company? Because if you're not doing that, it's just a piece of paper that doesn't mean anything. And we have to, and I think that's something that leaders can work on as well, is, okay, when I'm confused, I feel uncertain, is there an anchor that I can use, which is, like you said, like values. And if you don't have values and a mission and a vision, you're going to find it very difficult to lead, because you're leading from what place? There's no center.
So, and there's no shared there's no shared understanding, right?
Right.
What's at the foundation. No, so I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah. And I also have found that when leaders don't go back to the foundation, it can cause issues, meaning they seem uninformed and they seem like they can't lead because they're not leading from a place of anything. They're leading from kind of their own agenda, and that never resonates well.
No, that's right.
Hollow. There's a hollowness to that.
Yes. And I think one of the other challenges is, sometimes in larger organizations, or laddered organizations, sometimes the challenge isn't actually senior leadership. Like senior leadership might be fully in
Yes.
value.
I've seen this as well. Yes.
If their managers don't know how to speak to the values and don't understand them, then that's where the disconnect happens, right?
Middle
And so I
management.
think there's a lot of work to be done to support middle managers in understanding what it means to lead with your values and to bring the culture into their teams. Because I think sometimes if they're not doing that well, and then there's feedback that comes in that there's a culture challenge, senior leadership doesn't quite understand what's going on because they do live the values. And so, really pinpoint where the problem is and where you need to focus your efforts is really, really important. And the last thing that I'll add maybe about this topic of living your values, like, yes, you should revisit your values regularly. And, we can become enamored of our technical experts and ignore or forgive bad behavior. And
yes,
and
everyone listening knows that they can think of an example or two or 5 of that.
And so if your values if they really are your values, then you will not tolerate that behavior, right? And so we should never allow somebody, just because they're technically expert, to not have to follow the values, right? Or the culture of an organization. And that holding that kind of accountability can be really hard for folks. But it's so critical because otherwise, right, your staff are looking at you and they're like, you say you leave, your values, but I have somebody who's disrespecting me all the time, right? So I think it's about accountability and your values, right? Both of them have to be in line together.
Yes.
So sometimes our work, and sometimes the toxic person doesn't even know that they're being that way because no one's ever had the courage to tell them.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So, yes. I have found that leaders have to be better equipped with having conversations. How do I would say, I don't like calling them difficult conversations, but it's uncomfortable. Like feedback. People I know tend to be surprised when I say what I've seen is managers are not equipped with how do I have an honest feedback conversation that is clear, that the person leaves feeling like I know exactly what I need to do moving forward. That is actually not often that happens because we're promoting people who are high performing into a manager leadership position without teaching them what kind of leader do I want to be? And what makes an effective leader? And so oftentimes that's where they get, they will reach out to someone like you, or they get a coach, or they're trying to figure out what is my leadership style, but also like what does the research show makes an inclusive leader? Like, what does it look like? And how can I step into that more fully? And I think there's a missed opportunity there for leaders because we don't set them up for success oftentimes.
No, I think that's right. And something I say a lot to my clients is, feedback is a gift.
Yeah.
And the earlier that you give the gift, the more impactful it's going to be, right? I think if you give the feedback so politely that the person doesn't understand it, it's not a gift, right? If you wait 5 years to tell somebody that they've been doing something that causes harm, it is a lot harder for them to change that habit.
Yes.
And so one of my goals for 2025 is to help organizations embrace continual feedback and feedback sort of at the start, right?
Outside of the performance review cycle, like outside of that
Yes,
cycle.
yes, yes. Like the first time that I do this thing that you think I could have done better, I want to get some feedback about it, right? And it doesn't have to be when you do it that way, it's not a big conversation.
No. And it's actually much easier, less stress, less pressure, right?
Exactly.
And when you, and let's like flip that around too, like even when you are a person working on something. So I'll give you a quick example of something like this. So I was working on, this is years ago now, but I remember asking someone who was going to be in a senior leader meeting that I was presenting at. And I was working on something specific about my presentation skills. I think I was working on speaking more slowly because I talk very fast, or historically have talked very fast. And I said, I want you to pay attention to my pace. How is my pacing in the presentation? So before I went and I said, hey, so and so, I'm really working on pacing. Can you just watch that for me and let me know after the meeting how I did? He was like, sure, no problem. And so I did the presentation, and afterwards I said, hey, like, how did I do? And he said, I think you got really excited in the beginning and you were talking really fast. And then when your nerves kind of calmed down, you hit a really nice pace. And so I could tell that you were getting into your groove a little bit, maybe like 25% of the way in. He's like, so here's something you can try. So from the beginning, you're at that pace already. Like that was a 2-minute conversation. But I also asked for the feedback in advance because I'm like, oh, there's something I'm working on. How do I make sure I'm getting constant feedback in real time? Like that's also, but that requires self-awareness because someone had told me, Arivee, you're pacing, right? Actually, this is actually more of, there's a feedback loop here.
Yes. Well, and I think yes, we need to reflect on the self. We also need to know that we can ask for feedback.
Yes.
And then
in real time. Yes.
Know that how to give it to us, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah, obviously I trusted this person to ask them. I knew them. This wasn't a random senior leader. It's someone who I'd worked with, who I knew well, who I knew would be honest with me. And I could trust that if the feedback was not what I wanted to hear, I was still going to receive it. Right. But that's also the piece there of relationships. Right. You have to be able to build a relationship with your team and with people to be asking for feedback and expecting that you're going to get honest feedback. And that's where like the psychological safety comes in. Do I feel like I'm included here? Do I feel like I belong here? It's all interconnected. And I'm sure you see that in your work as well.
No, it is absolutely interconnected. But when you create the kind of community where people can have those kinds of conversations and you know what people's needs are and you can adapt to those needs, really beautiful things happen, right?
Yeah. It's more seamless and it doesn't feel so difficult. It doesn't feel like such work, quote unquote work. It feels like, oh, this is part of our culture. This is how we operate. And when everyone's on the same page, when you see, and I'm sure you've seen this, Valerie, like you've seen a shift on a team and it's so beautiful to see the transformation.
It is absolutely beautiful. I've been witnessing that this past quarter and with a client. And I think one of the beautiful things is that we were seeing it before they saw it. And right, because we were seeing
I love that.
changes. And then they start to see the changes and they are getting excited about it and they're getting confident, right?
Yes.
And so that's a really beautiful, that's one of the beautiful gifts to us of the work that we do, is that we get to witness behavior change and team change that is so powerful. So it's a real joy.
Oh, I love that. So what are you most excited about for 2025 with respect to promoting good or even personally?
Yes. So excited to launch this new product, an inclusive leadership assessment and coaching program. And so if any of you are interested in that for yourself or for your rising leaders or for your senior leaders, we'd love to talk. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I'm really excited about is traveling to Mexico more and bringing amazing women with me. So I have been going back to Mexico, I mean, my whole life, but increasingly more because my children are now grown. And so I have more freedom than
Yes.
you might have.
Yes.
And so I always post tons of pictures of the culture and of the things that I do there. And women have been asking me about it. And so I was like, oh, like I should take a group or two. So I'm very excited. I'm taking a group in March, and I'm taking a group for Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead, in October. And so if you are interested in growing your inclusive leadership, if you want to discover Mexico, not with any of the nastiness that you might hear about
Yes.
in the airwaves here, but with somebody who is from there,
Mhm.
I'd love to have you join. So those are the things that I'm really excited about. I'm going to play a lot more in 2025, and I say that both because I want to have a lot more personal play with traveling and with friends, but I think that when we have been the most successful in moving our clients and promoting good, it's when they see the work of inclusive leadership as play, right?
Mm.
Um, and and I don't mean that means that you take it lightly, right? It's important work, but you see it as a gift, right? Of love
Yes.
and accountability to your team.
Yes.
Then you can be more successful. So those are the things I'm looking forward to.
Wait, so Valerie, is your theme for 2025 play, or is there another theme and intention you have for intention you have for 2025?
So play and growth, personal growth for myself, growth for our clients. One of the mantras that I'm embracing for this year is I am my clients, right? And my clients are me. I mean, I was a manager, right? I've also been that person who struggles in a place, right? And I think the more that I share my experiences, that can inform, right, the work that I do with my clients. It can make them feel seen in who I am, right, in the connection that we might have,
Yes.
and move us from this place where it's like us versus them, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are all in it together. The work that I do is about all of us, and so play and growth, and and all of us. Those are the
Yes. All of us together. Yes. Okay. One last question, Valerie, before
yes.
I ask you how people can reach out to you and find you, do you have a favorite book or favorite books, and can you share them with us?
So I do not have a favorite book. In
You have
part,
many favorite books.
well, because I love reading new books. So I mean, I'm very excited to read your book.
Okay. Thank you.
And so I love reading books on leadership. If I'm reading fiction, the fiction is either historical or like world fiction, right? Like
Mhm.
stories that are set in places that I don't know a lot about so that I can learn about the place.
Mhm.
And so I really love reading new books. I have been reading this book,
Mhm.
Minúsculas Gotas de Paz. And actually,
Mhm.
our mutual friend Dulce Orozco gave it to me.
Ah, okay.
I have been reading more and more poetry because, sometimes I need a reset, or I need, sort of something that's going to inspire me for the work that I'm about to do. And I have found Pedro Campos's work really helpful to sort of set me in the right place.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in reading more poetry, um, and love book recommendations.
Ah, okay. Okay. Do you have a leadership book that you typically recommend to people?
No, and I'll say why. And it's sort of the same kind of advice that I share about inclusive leadership books or DEI books. We all need different things. And
Mm.
so depending on what you need, I'll send you a different book. So I will say two books that I've read recently, Atomic Habits and Super Communicators,
Mhm.
right? So like if you need to change a habit, Atomic Habits is a great book to read. If you don't communicate well to people who are different to you, Super Communicators is a fabulous, fabulous read. And in the D&I space, I really love Wayfinders, by
Okay.
Kay Frank. Um,
Yep.
so those are some recommendations.
No, those are great. No, those are great recommendations. Okay, so Valerie, how can we find you? How can we reach out to you?
Yes. So I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. You can find my company on either of those platforms with just Promoting Good. You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find Promoting Good at www.promotinggood.com. And excited to talk to people who care about inclusive leadership, excited to talk to people who care and are curious about Mexico and want to explore, and anyone who is looking to make workplaces a better space.
Oh, I love that. And I will include all of those links in the show notes. So if you're listening, you would just click on the episode description, scroll down, and all the links will be there. So I will link to Valerie's LinkedIn. I'll link to her website. So you get all of that info right there. Valerie, thank you so much for joining me today. I really loved our conversation. You are second to none. You are an expert in your field. I love your transition from like beautiful social justice oriented lawyer, really focused on uplifting the community, to continuing that work in a different way in the work that you do now. I think you're such a great example for our community and for essentially anyone who is trying to make a big impact in the world. I really think your work is probably much more impactful than we'll ever be able to measure. And so I just want to thank you too for doing the work that you do.
I am so grateful that you had me on your podcast. I've been listening in and really appreciate the conversation and have enjoyed getting to know you a little bit, and can't wait to read your book. It's on my list. So thank you for the time, and I hope folks listening have enjoyed this.
Thanks, Valerie.
Take care.